my name is Vilerka Bilbao. I am an immigration attorney, and I am here today joining the Defund Hate campaign along with hundreds of other organizations throughout the United States who are campaigning and asking for really an overview of what's happening with the Department of Homeland Security. So just so that you understand, on March 1st, 20 years ago, the Department of Homeland Security was created and became operational, and it's part of a really racist and Islamophobic response to the 9/11 attack. And it was created under the guise of this war on terror. When we created DHS, there was a consolidation of power between multiple federal agencies. And now the Department of Homeland Security is the umbrella agency for other offices like ICE, which is the police for immigration, CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, which continues to propagate xenophobic ideals that immigrants are a security threat to the United States. So what I want to do today is I'm going to introduce my sister. She works with me. She's one of my case managers at my law firm, and she has knowledge as to how these organizations function, how these government offices function. And we just kind of want to shed some light about what's happening with the Department of Homeland Security, what difficulties immigrants face when they have to deal with these agencies, and really why these agencies shouldn't be in our laws. So Nicole, welcome. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So tell me first a little bit about what it is that your role as a case manager is, and how you come in contact with either the Department of Homeland Security or ICE or CBP while doing your work.
Yeah, definitely. So I, like you mentioned, I'm a case manager at the firm. I basically ensure that our clients get the representation that they and the services that they are paying for. And how we do that is that we ensure that the case is moving along at a successful, or at the time that it should be moving along according to USCIS standards. We also kind of set up the tasks for everybody inside the firm to ensure that it's pretty much organized and it flows correctly within the firm. I interact with ICE because we do a lot of requests on behalf of the clients for ICE. So we do talk a lot to deportation officers. We also see the flow of the case, and because we are overseeing cases, we do see the problems that we face with ICE or DHS.
So what is one of the kind of common problems that you see when you deal with ICE, the immigration police?
I think when it comes to ICE, there's an array of problems, but when we think of ICE or DHS or CBP, we think of justice. And there is no justice really within these organizations for immigrants. And I say that because the laws are not applied equally and just throughout all ICE detention centers or ICE service centers. You can have the same arguments for a client with the same, and you can have the same entry date, the same entry manner, and you will argue for one client the same thing, and maybe this ICE office approves it, but then the ICE office down the street or in another state declines giving that person the same rights as the other. So there is no like set rules. There's like no memo to follow within ICE. So that leaves a lot of immigrants kind of in the air.
Yeah. So one of the big problems with this, and let me illustrate what Nicole is talking about, is ICE and the Department of Homeland Security and CBP and all these agencies that fall under the Department of Homeland Security are employees of the president and the presidential administration in the United States. So every time that we have a new president come in and their new team come in, it's a great thing because we get to vote them in, right? We get to bring them in. And the idea is that they're going to be able to put in changes into the system that are going to help us. The reality with immigration is that it's consistently a contested issue and also a political issue. So you have one president come in, you have one administration come in, put up their rules. Now officers who are working in those agencies now sometimes need to change what they've been doing for years that has been working. And so that stops the flow of some cases. And then 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 years later, another administration comes in and changes the rules again. So we have this kind of immigration system, almost like Band-Aids, kind of on top of one another, trying to fix some problems. And it's really problematic, right? One of the biggest issues here is the amount of funding that this agency uses. So since its inception, it has spent for 20 years since its inception, DHS has been given $1.4 trillion. That's with a T, not billion.
Yeah.
$1.4 trillion. They have deported more than 5 million individuals, and many a times deported people incorrectly without following the laws of the United States. So
Correct.
as taxpayers, as US citizens, as legal permanent residents, sometimes it's our job to make sure that these government offices are working properly. And I don't know how to tell you about other agencies. I work with immigration, so these are kind of the only agencies that I can speak for, that I have experience, but we know that they are not using their funding properly because cases are kind of just stuck forever in places.
They're backlogged completely. So one of the other big issues that we face with them is that we sometimes don't receive responses for months on end. I can give a specific case that I have just been working on one of our clients, a person who has been waiting for 7 months on a response to get their bonds back. So this is a client that had a deportation case. Their deportation case was closed, and they have now a pathway to citizenship. They are owed the bond that they paid when they got out of detention. And if it's taken since September of 2022, we just got a response now at the end of February. So, and that is with a dedicated person following up every 2 weeks with ICE. So we have this huge backlog of responses, of cases that are halted, and yet they have $1.3 trillion. You know, they claim they have staffing issues, which I'm sure through the pandemic was an issue as the whole world stopped, but they have the funding to get the staff. And yet here we are.
Yeah. So let's talk, Nicole, a little bit about, because you mentioned at the beginning how just there's laws in place, but there's different offices and different offices function in a different way. What is for you the sentiment of clients? Because you deal a lot directly with clients, right? What is the sentiment of people who say, okay, well, my cousin in another city got status and we have the exact same case, right? Like what is that with our immigrant community?
I think it's extreme frustration. It's disappointment. It's hard to understand because I think that the idea of the United States immigration system, law system in general, is that it's an easy, organized process. That's the idea that we have of the US. And it's not that case. There is extreme disorganization. Like I was mentioning, the laws are not applied equally throughout service centers or through ICE offices. So you have these issues where people have the same entries in the same case, and they cannot understand why one gets approved and one gets denied. And to be honest, we don't know. We don't know why either. There is no answer, just that they're just one service center is or officer is not interpreting the law in a certain way and one is. So it's really just an injustice to all immigrants.
What would be your recommendation to an immigrant who finds themselves having to deal with these agencies? They're by themselves. A lot of the times they don't speak the language, right? Because we're talking in English right now, but most of our clients don't even speak the language at all. So what would be your number one recommendation for them?
Get an attorney. I cannot stress. There's a lot of pro bono attorneys also. Obviously, having an attorney is a privilege because it costs money. However, these avenues or these legal jargon is impossible for someone to navigate unless they understand it. And sometimes it's difficult for us to understand it because it changes so often, or it's convoluted on purpose so that people get lost in the system. So you need some sort of representation and guidance. Otherwise, it can really affect, your case and your status here.
Yeah, that would be the same recommendation coming from an attorney as well. I mean, the law in immigration changes so often. It changes sometimes based on who's president. Like there's different programs available based on administrations. There's also a lot of back and forth about what's legal today, what's legal tomorrow. A new case comes out and that might change completely what you can do. So definitely having legal advice and having someone walk with you along that path. I would also say information. We are in an age where you can now Google anything, you can go on YouTube, type up any question, and capture as much information as you can about the problem that it is that you have, and then go to a professional, right? I've said this story before to people, and it's like, if I have a car problem, I go to a mechanic. If I have flooding in my house, I might go to a plumber, right? Like, I go to a professional in those areas. If my tooth hurts, I go to a dentist. So it's go to a professional in that area, because we get to do this every single day. So we get to look at your problem and maybe solve it so much more faster than if you do it on your own. Let's go back a little bit to DHS, because I know that they are problematic, but we do have to work with them. What has been maybe your best tip that you can say of to work with officers? Because at the end of the day, they may be having issues as an organization, but at the end of the day, they're the ones who give us the documents that we need for our clients. So how do you work with them and make that still somewhat enjoyable, right? For
I will say, at the end of the day, these are people. So one of the best things that you can do for your clients is to give them all the information possible. So one of the things I love to do once we onboard a client is, number one, automatically let them know that they have legal representation. I find that that makes a huge difference in someone's case. Once ICE or DHS knows that somebody has legal representation, I feel like they kind of calm down a little bit. You know, I feel like they get, I wouldn't say less strict, but they understand that this person's trying to do their things the correct way. So I also make sure that I update ICE every step of the way for our clients. The second that we send a petition for our clients and we receive a receipt notice, that's an email to ICE. Hey, they have this pending. Hey, they changed their address. Hey, they changed their phone number. Every single update in the client's life, ICE is getting an email from us, just to ensure that they have kind of nothing to fall back on our client for. So I think communication is really the key with ICE. We also have some ICE officers on the flip side that are very, very helpful and will work with you as long as you, again, communicate consistently with them, which is a challenge, because even though sometimes you're communicating, it's one-sided communication. You're sending an email sometimes into the void, but still, you know, you have a backup that you did try.
Yeah. And I think that might be, you know, one of the best things to remember. The Department of Homeland Security is a government organization, but the people who are operating it are human beings. They're other U.S. citizens just like you and me, and they are following the government's directives. So a lot of the times, sometimes the government just doesn't give us what we want, and it's not necessarily because of your case specifically, but because of, you know, mandates from up above. This is what your superiors are saying. So understanding that you're in a legal battle with the government is a big thing. And if you are having to deal with these issues on your own, you're going to be going through an uphill battle and likely losing. So having an attorney or someone by your side is just going to give you, well, so much more of a better chance to do things. So I want to go back, because one of the things that we've been doing at our firm has been working with other organizations in a campaign to shut down the Baker Detention Center. So I don't know if many of you know, I know that I've published maybe some videos about it, but Baker Detention Center is one of the various detention centers that we have in the state of Florida. It's about 40 minutes from my office here in downtown Jacksonville. And it is operated by Baker County. So it's a state government county, right, who has a contract with the federal government. And then that way they can house immigrant detainees while their cases are pending in immigration court. Now, it's just very problematic, that detention center, because for years we've had complaints about the way in which they treat immigrants in detention. So before I talk about some of those injustices, Nicole, do you have any kind of war stories? Do you have any clients that you've had to deal with that have had problems while being detained?
Yeah. So first, I think we should go back a little bit to what you talked about when you talked about the how DHS was created. So DHS was created, like you said, as a response to the 9/11 attacks, and it was funded as pretty much an organization that was biased against brown people. and Islamic people, really. That organization transformed into what it is today, but it still has a lot of that racist basis, as it was created. So when we talk about these detention centers and the things that happen in those detention centers, I think it's extremely important to keep in mind that that is the majority of the people that are being detained in these detention centers. A lot of our clients, we have a lot of clients that have been detained in ICE detention centers, and it ranges from things like during the COVID-19 pandemic at its height. You had people stuck together, sleeping next to each other. There were no COVID-19 spreading prevention. You also have physical abuse. You have medical abuse. We have a particular client who they were having an asthma attack during their stay at the detention center, and they almost have to die for them to receive medical attention. We have people with high blood pressure that are unable to get their medications, suffering in there. We have families that are separated in these detention centers. We've seen so much of the injustices that happen in there. I honestly wouldn't even know where to begin.
Yeah. So I think what's important to point out here is that when you're in an immigration detention, really in any detention context, but when you're in an immigration detention, you really need to get your family and friends to help you find somebody to help. Because unfortunately, once you are detained by immigration, they have such a quick process and they have so much control over over where you are. That's number one. They can transfer you between detention centers across the entire country if they want to and move your case across. That was one of the big things that we saw during the last administration. It was just a lot of people kind of coming in through the southern border and then being shipped across 3, 4, 5 detention centers before being given an order of removal at a super remote location without access to family. So that's one of the things, but it happens very quickly.
And I would like to add to that. We have a specific case of a client who they were never even told where they were going. And we obviously saw the big news with what happened in Martha's Vineyard of immigrants being transported to other cities. But it's not just those people. It's been happening for years where you get in and they send you anywhere. They don't tell you where you're going. You don't get to inform your family. That's if you have family here. Imagine you get to the southern border. You're put on a bus and you're shipped 3 states down. You don't even know if you're still in the United States. You don't know what state you're in. So that alone is a violation of someone's rights. You're basically kidnapping them, You're essentially kidnapping them. You're not telling them where they're going. They have no idea what you're telling them. They can't understand you. And you're offering no guidance because it's not like they're giving them information. They're just shipping you off. So I don't. That to me is a huge topic and a huge conversation that we can spend all day talking about.
Yeah. So I want to go a little bit further into that because I think with my colleagues in the immigration field, we often talk about human trafficking, and we believe really that the Department of Homeland Security is participant in some sort of legal human trafficking in the United States. And the reason why we say that is because immigrants, like the federal government writes checks per person who's detained in a detention center. So every single day that we have an immigrant detained in a detention center, we are spending tax dollars to give to usually a private agency, because most of these ICE detention centers are not by just an actual government agency. It's really the government doesn't have enough manpower to provide the service that under the law they're supposed to provide. So they hire this private entity who now has a profit in mind, right? So their interest is really to have people sitting and lingering in detention centers for as long as possible, because that's how they make money from the federal government contracts that they have. So it's very problematic because the United States is participating in this. And I completely understand the needs for security. I understand that there's some people who, based on what they've done already inside the society, maybe should be detained, but we can have a way of having humane detention centers, have a way of having more of a humane process and
Exactly.
not violating human rights at the same time that
Mhm.
we're having these kind of security concerns that the government talks about. So what we really would be asking is basically Congress needs to kind of stop writing these blank checks to these agencies, stop wasting our taxpayer dollars in these kinds of procedures, especially when the procedure is paperwork. A lot of the people who are detained, and I'll say this, I always talk about driver's licenses and how important they are, because a lot of people end up in this detention complex or in this detention kind of process with ICE simply because they cannot be issued a driver's license because of their immigration paperwork, and they get arrested. They do have to drive. You have to pay for food. You have to have a job here in the United States. So it's really just very counterintuitive. We could be using the money to put in programs in place that actually provide individuals the pathways to get paperwork in the United States. Some people never want to actually become citizens. Like some people would be satisfied coming to the United States with a work permit, paying taxes, contributing to our economy, and then maybe 10 or 15 years later going back home. But we don't really have these processes in place, and we're using money in the detention context when we could be using our taxpayer dollars to really grow our communities. And so with that, Nicole, I think one of the questions that I think is always important to kind of ask is, what would be another world that we could see where DHS's roles are a little bit different? Like, what do you think that could look like? An immigration system that would be more humane? Like from your experience, right? Like we need to balance those sides. We know that there's people doing wrong things.
Right.
We need to protect a little bit of that. But what could we do differently? What could the agency do differently to maybe treat people like humans?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question, right? It's what you're saying. We do have to have policies in place to ensure that we have an immigration system. When we talk about this, we're not asking to just eradicate all immigration processes. We're talking about the immigration process doesn't make any sense. Okay, and you hit the nail on the head when you said when you talk about driver's license, right? So you're essentially forcing, when you let people out, so you're in detention, you let them out and you say, well, yeah, go get your illegal paperwork, but you can't make money for a year because we won't give you a work permit for a year. We won't give you a driver's license because you don't have the right paperwork to get a driver's license. So you're stuck. How do you work? How do you eat? How do you feed your family that you just brought in? I think in a perfect world, right, we would reform all of the laws so that people that are released from detention are given the opportunity to become law-abiding citizens. Because what the government is asking you to do is to violate the law right after you are released, basically, from detention. And then with ICE itself, I do understand that people that have committed violent crimes should be, I don't want to say deported, but I think that people that commit violent crimes once they are in the United States and are immigrants, they need to have a certain process because we might not want people that commit violent crimes in our communities. However, a lot of the people that are getting deported are people with no history of crimes even whatsoever. So I think we really need to look at our deportation process. I think we need to look at the process of the detention centers and what that looks like. I think that the United States is supposed to be the most advanced first world country that has, prides itself for being liberal and forward thinking. And yet we are the ones violating all of these human rights for these people. So we cannot be pictured as saviors here in the United States and you still violate people's rights. I think we have to take a real look at what we're doing in these detention centers and make sure that we are upholding the law that's in place. I think a lot of these detention centers, because they're private entities, they sometimes go unsupervised, right? Who is supervising what these officers are doing in these detention centers?
Yeah. Perfect. Well, one of the things that we are going to have for you is and we're going to be recording this after we end this, but we are going to be sharing with you some stories from some clients who have been detained during the pandemic, who were detained in specifically Baker County, and who have stories about things that happened in there that were not right. So just make sure to check out our social media accounts, either through YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook. And you'll be able to find these videos there in the future. I just want to take the time to thank Nicole. Thank you so much for everything that you do in our firm. You are a case manager. You handle a lot of our cases and you help us out definitely. I think that she's had very good success with working with ICE and has definitely a lot of experience, which is why she knows about what's happening with these detention centers. And then just to finally close it off, I just want to remind you guys that if you are a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident in the United States, you do have the ability to talk to your congressman, talk to your U.S. representatives, write letters, make phone calls, so that we can talk about these changes. If you are an immigrant yourself or come from an immigrant family, you probably understand how these agencies have affected your life or your family's life, and really just kind of the traumas that come from being an immigrant in the United States. So we encourage everyone to participate civically in our communities, right? You can talk about this, you can record videos about your experiences. Just make sure that if you don't have legal status, that you consult with an attorney prior to putting anything on social media, because unfortunately we do have retaliation in this country. That's one of the problems with the Department of Homeland Security. We see retaliation from officers. Yeah. So just be careful with what you're posting. But if you are already a U.S. citizen, a legal permanent resident, then we welcome you to use your voice to help our communities. It's been a pleasure talking to everybody today, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.